Stray was initially released on July 19th, 2022 and came to PlayStation Plus Extra on launch day. I've been keeping a distant eye on this one since its first announcement back at E3 2020. It certainly looked interesting, but of the two cyberpunk games at E3 2020, it was definitely the underdog. Before we jump in, this review is story spoiler free, but we will be showcasing gameplay across the entire game as there are certain distinct sections that we would like to talk about. Also, if you like what you see here and want to see more, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment if there's any games you'd like us to take a look at. With that said, we're here to let you know if Stray is worth your time. We're going to start off this review a little meta, because this was meant to be last week's video, and there's a gameplay reason for that. I found this game so mind-numbingly boring that I fell asleep after an hour and a half of playing. The following days, I just did not want to continue with it, but I wouldn't have been satisfied reviewing a game I had not beat. There are some merits to this gameplay, but that sheer fact hangs over Stray in the worst kind of ways. We'll circle back to that later. I'd like to talk about what the game does well to start off with. There is a dedicated button that makes your controller meow, so honestly, just for that, this is Game of the Year. I really enjoyed some of the environmental puzzles here. There was one with clocks early in the game that put a massive smile on my face. Not every puzzle hits, but they all encourage exploration and creative thinking. These were the highlights of the game for me because they utilised your unique perspective as a cat to provide some interesting conundrums. Speaking of the environments, they are very well designed, it is always intuitive to know where you have to go, and there are plenty of opportunities to explore what is admittedly a very cool world. And that is where the good ends. I really did not have a good time with this game despite the charm of playing as a cat. First off, my biggest annoyance. Why is the button to move to the next text box square, but the button to close them at the end of a conversation circle? This is such a mild annoyance, but it's such an odd choice. Conversations are the crux of the narrative, and the button prompt is so far from the text box that it just makes talking to characters clunky. At its core, this is one step above a walking simulator. Movement is broken into two halves. You move whilst holding the X button to platform, and you move whilst holding the right trigger to outrun these fellas. Platforming is locked to looking for the X button prompt to move around. This makes platforming feel very clunky and extremely inconsistent. You can't even walk off of ledges that you have to jump down. You instead have to look for the button prompt. The devs have explained that they did this to make you feel more like a cat, but they seem to have forgotten that they were making a cat video game, and the crux of the game, just moving around, is not very fun. It always felt like I didn't have full control of my cat, just like in real life, but unlike real life, I'm here to have fun. Knowing where you need to jump feels intuitive, but I had some moments where the camera would fight me on that, and exactly where you can jump follows no real rhyme or reason. It's just wherever the button prompts are. There are also 3 more slices of gameplay. First up are these sections where you have to outrun these scary blobs. These are sort of fun in the sense that they are environment puzzles under pressure, but the idea gets used and dumped before it gets too interesting. All you really have to do is hold the right trigger whilst running in a circle. Speaking of holding the right trigger whilst running in a circle, you have the combat sections. Here you have a light that allows you to kill the blobs. Again, all you have to do is run around in a circle. The light lacks oomph and overheats way too quickly. It's a 3-second light with a 5-second recharge. This is an interesting evolution of the running puzzles, but there is far too much downtime, and once again, the mechanic is taken from you before the idea gets time to really stretch its legs. Finally, there are stealth sections. These are the most refined of the gameplay slices outside of the interesting puzzles, and the idea does get pushed to some interesting environments. I did like these, but I was so worn down by the point I got to them that I couldn't appreciate them fully. Finally, there are certain points where you can scratch. I'm not sure what this is for. Some points of the game have you using this ability to progress the story, but others offer no tactile feedback. It was just really weird and inconsistent. There is some merit here, but it all feels half-baked. Experiences like this are usually laser-focused and tightly designed. Abzu and Journey, just to name a few, kept my attention the whole way through, and they admittedly do less in terms of innovating their gameplay. There's hints of greatness in Stray, but this is gameplay that is worse than bad. Bad, I can laugh at. This was just dull. So dull that it put me to sleep. And when a game is that dull, something has gone fundamentally wrong. Stray gets the minimum score of 1 out of 5 for its gameplay offering. It may not play well, but it sure does look pretty. This is such gorgeous and detailed work. The neon lights, the mysterious plague, the robot characters, it all comes together to form a really unique world. I just have to gush about these robot designs. The weird mix of retro tech with outlandish science fiction is always really cool. The robots manage to look distinct, and whilst not the most emotive, I can tell you what Seamus or the Doc look like. Through everything, the character designs definitely left an impression. Each environment is distinct and gorgeous. You have the beautiful nature at the start of the game, the grimy lower level, and the vibrant midtown. Certain parts of the game get insanely creepy, and the amount of story packed into the environments is wild. It's just a shame the actual narrative doesn't make much use of that. The UI is very serviceable. I like that it's not locked and moves with the characters, but it is entirely function over form. The music throughout the game is very bland, and I wasn't the biggest fan of how plain the button prompts were. It made them hard to see at points. This is what will knock a point off. But seriously, this game is gorgeous, and if there's one reason to play through it, it's to see the cool areas the game throws at you. Stray licks its wounds with some solid art direction. We're giving it a 4 out of 5. Games like Stray live and die on their storytelling, even more so than their gameplay. I'll hold the X button for as long as you ask if you provide me a good story. Unfortunately, the narrative on offer here is so dull and unengaging that I just did not have it in me to care about anything that was happening. You are a passive observer here. You have no stake. You are a cat, for crying out loud. The entire narrative here is just told to you. BlueTwelve provides you plenty of exposition. The other characters tell you what they're feeling, but they never really show it. And the game attempts emotional moments that just fall flat on their face because the game doesn't do the work to make these characters interesting. It is completely tell over show. I cared more about the companion cube in Portal than I did about the entire cast of Stray combined, and that was a box with a heart on it. I just cannot engage with this style of narrative, and whilst I'm totally open to the side of the argument that that's why I didn't like it, I struggle to find anything interesting that hasn't been done before. I did think that the environmental storytelling of this creepy plague was really interesting, but it just goes nowhere, and I never managed to get attached to the story because it felt like I had no agency in it. The ending of the game is also insanely underwhelming. Everything just solves itself because reasons, but at the same time, it feels like nothing is really resolved. You just walk off. That is that. And this entire narrative ends up with the minimum score of 1 out of 5. Stray is a wonky technical offering on both PC and console. You do get free save slots to mess around with. This is unneeded, but a great inclusion. Gameplay settings include toggles for vibration, reticle, HUD, jump prompt, and auto camera. There are also major language options. Audio has sliders for master, music, and effects volume. Controls has a slider for sensitivity, toggles for inverts on both axes, and you can completely rebind the controls. Graphics has sliders for gamma and motion blur. This is a very basic set of settings, but it is all the game really needs. I was never left wanting to tweak something that wasn't here. There are no subtitle options, but the base subtitles are perfectly readable. It would have been nice to have some accessibility options here though. We experienced a few frame stutters on PS5, but nothing else. With that said, be wary if you're playing on PS4, there is a bug that completely corrupts your save towards the end of the game. I would absolutely wait for a patch here. PC performance seems very hit or miss, with some players reporting mass stuttering and others playing just fine. Make sure you're being wary of how your rig is operating. If you're looking at picking Stray up on PC, just be wary. With all of this mixed in, serviceable settings, solid PS5 performance, the really bad PS4 bug, and the hit or miss PC performance, we're rounding out the specs at a 3 out of 5. It took us just over 3 hours to complete Stray. This was with a little bit of exploration thrown in. This is a nice bite-sized game that can easily be completed in one go. Checkpoints feel very weird, but you can pause and see how far back the last checkpoint is at any time. The only time I was frustrated with this was towards the end of the big stealth section where I died and got sent right back to the beginning. Other than that, checkpoints were fairly forgiving. If you want to play this game in chunks, each chapter is not too long and they always make for decent jumping off points. Hard drive footprint is nice and small at just under 8GB. Despite finding the game very boring, it does have a great respect for your time and hard drive, so we're rounding out the commitment here with the full 5 out of 5. 14 out of 25 looks like a pretty good score, but it is just below the 15-point midpoint of what we consider worth your time. Stray is a very pretty, technically competent package that does respect your time, but the gameplay and narrative were so dull and unrewarding that they literally put me to sleep. This feels like a game where they got as far as putting a cute cat in a cool place, but then forgot to add the engaging gameplay and interesting story that these kinds of games live and die on. I cannot say in good faith that Stray is worth your time outside of exploring the pretty environments, but even exploring is unrewarding because it's tied down by the gameplay. Despite my criticisms, I really would like to see BlueTwelve Studios develop another game. There are some interesting ideas buried here, but for the next project, I'd go with refinement over variety. Stray is an interesting world, but it would have made a far better short film than it does a video game.